But there's some young people that came here and that were deeply disturbed by the fact that someone is sitting on the throne. The interesting aspect is that I have a rule that prohibits me from sitting on high seats. Because I'm no one, I'm a beggar. That is literally what it means. That is why I don't like the word monk much, because it comes with Christian connotations. But the main meaning of bhikshu or bhikkhu in Pali is beggar. I beg for food. I'm dependent for my food on other people. That is the social contract that I have with the world around me. And so to be a beggar is to be no one. That's the whole point. I wear the clothes of a beggar. These are not honorific, how do you call it? Like this is not the priest, like the emperor. In fact, how do you say this? What's the word in English? These are not the garbs of an emperor. Because in many ways, priestly garbs are based on that of the Roman emperor. That as the church took that position. But my clothes are actually made of all kinds of little pieces to remind me that they are cast of garbs, in effect, and they can't be stolen. There's nothing you can do with them. I mean, you can take my underrobe or my upper robe. They're completely useless. They consist of so many little pieces, there's nothing you can make out of them. Yeah. They're very cheap. I mean, I buy new robes, I think, every 3 or 4 years, and it's about 120 euros, including shipping from India. Yeah. And I never have problems in the morning. I have choices between red, and red. Yeah, which shall I wear? And to be honest, I only have 2 sets, so there's one in the laundry machine and there's one on my body, and there's no choice at all. So why then the high seat? And that is because of another rule. What is important is the Dharma, is the teachings, because they're liberating. And so when I'm teaching, I'm actually obliged to sit higher than the person I'm teaching to. So if we would be sitting on one of the hills back here, and you were sitting on top of the hill and I would be sitting lower, which would be normally perfectly fine, the moment I would start to explain the Dharma, I have to move up. I have a whole series of rules that don't allow me to teach in certain circumstances. Very famously, for example, when the great King Ashoka met a Buddhist monk, he was not talking to him. So this king was sitting on the throne, and this monk Nagasena, was just sitting silently on the floor until someone pointed out to the king that he was not talking because he can't talk to someone that is sitting higher. And so the king came down and the monk went up, and then the monk can teach. And so it puts the ethical ideal above worldly power. That is why I'm sitting where I'm sitting. I also can't teach to someone that is wearing arms. So if one brings a gun to the room, it's fine, but I'm not talking. I have to wait for the gun to leave the room, then I'm talking. I can't talk when people are wearing hats, because it's, in classical India, that was disrespectful to keep your hat on in the presence of other people. It's not courteous, so you must take them off. So if someone starts off with an uncourteous position, I'm not allowed to teach. It's not about me, it's about the Dharma. That's why I'm sitting here. And obviously, when we talk about refuge, the central practice of this tradition is taking refuge. Yeah. And taking refuge is decidedly not something outside of you. And when we talk about refuge, we talk about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and of the three, the highest refuge is the Dharma. It is normally, the reason why the books, at least in this cupboard, the books are higher than the statues. The statues represent the Buddha, but the Dharma is always above the statues. And when you go to great monasteries, for example, Nalanda Monastery in southern France, you have beautiful imagery of the Buddha, but the texts are way above the statues because that is what really matters. More important than the books, because the books in and of themselves don't convey anything. It is our engagement with them and ultimately our realization of them. That is the refuge that we see. So when we take refuge, what we try to do is to generate something inside, not outside. And for me, that's very important to remember, because if the Buddha would need our prayers, if I would find out that he does, I would get up and leave. Because that means that we have a conditional relationship. That means that the Buddha is serving me to get something in return. Well, I have enough of these relationships. I don't need another one of these. Because that makes the Buddha unreliable. Because in that case, the Buddha would say things to facilitate me giving something back. He would not be teaching me what I need. He will be teaching me what I need to hear so that I give him something back. And that is exactly not the case. That is also exactly why I'm a beggar monk. The only thing that I need is food, but there's no qualification what food I need. Just enough to have another day. And so, again, when we do like prostrations, when I do prostrations, what I do is visualize in front of me that's what I hope to become. So it is a mirror. I try to look at the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha to tell something about me, to reflect on what real freedom, what real refuge is. Where do I want to go? And then I prostrate, realizing that these qualities is not about the person. And the early Indian art, when you look at, like, for example, the famous Amravati Stupa depictions that I talked about yesterday, that are so wrongly in the British Museum. You should look back to India, where they came from. But in the very early Buddhist art, what you see is that the moment the individual becomes the Buddha, he disappears from the depictions. You see the Bodhisattva doing, he's having his different rebirths and his final life, walking away from home and doing the ascetic life. And the moment he becomes enlightened, there's only the tree. There's no person there. And so when I prostrate to the Buddha, I'm not prostrating to some other person with needs and predicaments and neurosis and what on. This is someone that is free from all these problems, someone that is without, that's what we're going to talk about today, someone that is without a self, a selfless and thereby completed person. And so I prostrate to the content of the Buddha, to his mind. I know what that mind is, and I know that mind mirrors my mind. I have the same thing. His is perfected and mine is in the business of getting there. But we're not qualitatively different. And that is my relationship with the Buddha. I have enormous veneration for that someone did that. The idea that someone practiced for 3 countless eons out of love for us is remarkable. I mean, what a thing to do. To give everything, and not just a year or 2 years, not even a universe long, no, 3 entire universes long. Seeing whole universes come into existence and then disappearing again, and just continuing that practice, because it needs to be done. So that is what I bow to when I take refuge in the Buddha. He tells me something about me. But the Buddha wants one thing, that I become a Buddha as well. That is our contract. And so he only cares for me because, as I said yesterday, when I imagine what it feels like to become enlightened, and in fact, that is what I practice even in my own limited way every day. Whatever comes to my mind, I realize that I obtained it also in dependence on you and everyone else. No great meditative development always feels like it is given to you. You sit for weeks and months and years and seemingly not much happens. You just do your best, and then all of a sudden, out of the complete blue, your mind has a different perspective on things. And you look at it with awe. And it's a gift. It's a gift partially given to you by your own previous moments, as it were. You could say it is a gift given by your mind. But it's equally a gift that is given by all the beings that you're connected with. You're listening, you're practicing with me, but me teaching is, for one thing, my own practice of generosity. I need to make my mind more and more malleable until it becomes effortless as it is in the Buddha. So I'm practicing as much as you do, and this aspect of my training I can't do without you. On my own in the morning in my little hut, that does not make any sense. And We joke that we'll quickly come with an ambulance, like it's not going entirely well with this guy. He talks a lot to himself. And so when I reflect on the Dharma, I reflect on what the Dharma produces. Something is called true paths. And true paths are, to keep it as simple as possible, are moments of mind that are reliable, in which we see the way things are. And when we see the way things are, we are at that moment freed. We have pathways within ourselves that lead to one place, liberation. And these we need to cultivate. And they lead to something which, again, could do with better marketing, but it's called true cessations. A true cessation simply means that the problem stops, and stops forever. That is refuge. Refuge is not the obtaining of something. Refuge, real refuge, is the losing of the original problem. So that is what I prostrate to, because that is the most magnificent thing of all. And this still exists in the world. There is people still with true cessations, and that is exquisite. That's extraordinary. And you can meet them and you can feel what it does to a human being when he or she is free of what we struggle with. When I take refuge in the Sangha, and that for me is particularly important, at least I complain a lot about it. In the West, we have very strange egalitarian ideas. I always joke, in Holland, actually, and my own culture is not egalitarian at all. Everyone believes that he is, or she is superior to everyone else. It's only in that we are egalitarian. Yeah. And that creates for very unhealthy social dynamics. Yeah. And so one of the way that this works out is that we use the Sangha as like a synonym for the word community. And I think that is, for one thing, not necessary. The word community is quite a nice word, to be honest. I like that word a lot. Now, there's a lot of, we will not do that, but there's a lot of things to unpack etymologically in the word community. Yeah, to commune, look it up. But the Sangha refers to people that have rid themselves of their neurosis, of the ignorance that underlies them. That is what Sangha is. Sangha is a community that is safe, that you know to be safe because they have no longer the problem that we struggle with. They can't behave unethically. Yeah. And so most of us still struggle with that, and that is quite okay. And that's not a judgment, that is where we are, and that's quite, well, ultimately not entirely fine, but there's no choice. We will have to work with whatever is here today. But it is when I prostrate to the Sangha, that is something that I want to live up to. And because without it, without true cessations, we are actually not safe at all. No, we are still, our love is still conditional for one reason. And the conditional love is not safe love yet. That's all we have for the moment, and it's okay. But it always comes with a price. And that price is that I would like to aspire to one day to have a love that is given simply because that is what needs to be done out of gratitude. That is reliable love, and that is Sangha. And by extension, and that is something that is monastics is very important too, is that our monastic rules actually, when they kept well, and that is, I'm very pleased to hear how Venerable here is doing his utmost best in his new monastic fully ordained vows. How he's living up to them is really inspiring. And when we keep these rules well, on the outside, our behavior looks exactly as those as arahats, as those that have found freedom. So we become, at least in our body and speech, safe beings, because we're not allowed to be unsafe. And we have, for example, very specific rules. Our Venerable here can't ask for food. He can't, for example, speak in such a way that implies him wanting to get good food. That's not permissible. So he'd better go for a day without food than suggesting to someone that it would be a good idea to give him food, to say, for example, like, I like your sweater so much, I'm not hungry. That is not allowed, because that means that at that moment my compliment is conditional. And so we create a misdeed. Yeah. And we can only say that your sweater is beautiful, which it is, just out of kindness, without wanting anything in return. So Sangha is something, I think that is a term we should keep safe. As a community, that should be something that we aspire to. We would love to become Sangha. And may the day come that this space is filled with arahats and prajna Buddhas and bodhisattvas and Buddhas. You know, that within you true paths and true sensations have arisen. You are free. And then you are free to care for others. Because it has, even Jesus says so beautifully, love is sufficient unto itself. It never needed anything in return. In fact, it requires nothing in return. Does it make sense? And the prayers are the same thing. Again, if the Buddha would, if all of a sudden he would complain behind me, like, I don't want these prayers, I want. And that would be the moment, in a way, to say jokingly, that would be the moment to walk out. The Buddha does not need our prayers at all. We do. And so when we pay homage to the Buddha, we are holding a mirror in front of us. Because the Buddha does not need the biography. In fact, we know quite for sure that the biography we have is just a myth. I grew up with the Pali Sutras, and it is surprising that within the Pali Sutras, the Buddha almost never talks about himself. He rarely does. So when he passed away, his students started to, on the basis of the few things that he said about himself and on their needs, and that does not diminish the myth, but it definitely is created after the Buddha had already passed away. People sought his closeness. And so his story became more and more important, which is a completely valid way of approaching. I'm not diminishing the importance of that story at all, but we know for sure it is a myth. And I love the fact that he felt never required to talk about himself. It was superfluous. He only needed to explain how he got there, so that everyone else could get there as well. The Buddha also didn't lord over his community. We know of various instances where his community actually did not listen to him at all. There's a famous sutra of the Kosambi monks, where a group of monks get into a conflict, and actually the Buddha advises them 6 times to please stop arguing. Both sides, 3 times to the one side and 3 times to the other side, which is interesting. He doesn't tell them that there's some problem with some monk having broken some of the rules, maybe. And so there's endless discussion going on, and the Buddha does not give them a solution of the problem. He doesn't tell them whether or not that monk made a fault, because the greater fault was them arguing. Thank you. And so he just told one community, one half, and the other half, like, please stop arguing. This is contrary to my teachings. And they didn't. And then he simply walked away. Yeah. And then he moves to another community after a while. There's a beautiful story in between that we'll see how literal that is, where he goes to a forest and is actually taken care of by an elephant, a monkey, and a parrot, I think. Yeah, fantastic story. But anyway, then afterwards, he goes to a community that is led by a monk called Anuruddha. Anuruddha is actually the first monk that speaks after the Buddha's passing away. I always felt that he should have been, the Buddha did not want a leader. The great Mahakashyapa became more or less de facto leader after the Buddha passed away. But the person that speaks the greatest wisdom of all after the Buddha passes away is Anuruddha. Anuruddha did not invent the light, as they say in Dutch. That was not the most intellectual guy around, but the Buddha liked him. The Buddha cared for him very intimately. And Anuruddha achieved the final aim. But so the Buddha has heard that Anuruddha is living with a group of 2 other monks, I always forget, 2 other monks. The 3 of them are living somewhere together, and the community around them likes them a lot. And almost as a display of the alternative. He goes and visits these three monks, which is then very humbling. When the Buddha arrives at the place where they're staying, this is in the park of some aristocrat, and when he arrives at the entrance, the gatekeeper actually doesn't want to let him in. And the Buddha was actually unrecognizable. And we make beautiful depictions of him, and these are beautiful mind maps, one could say. But it's quite humbling to notice that in the sutras you find very often that the people don't recognize the Buddha at all. In fact, there's one sutra in which Mahakashyapa is walking with the Buddha, being very embarrassed about the fact that he got beautiful silk robes, which we can accept. And the Buddha's robes are old and dirty. And he complains as long as it is needed for him to be able to switch robes with the Buddha. So the Buddha then finally accepts his silken robes and gives his dirty robes to Mahakashyapa. So the Buddha arrives at this community. And then he does something interesting. He calls them the Anuruddhas. He does not call their individual names. We know who they are. But why the Buddha calls them the Anuruddhas is then quickly explained by Anuruddha himself. And he says, when I see my brothers, I always, with my actions of body, speech, and mind, I only think of them with kindness. How lucky I am to live with such fellows. And I think of that when they're present, and I think of that when they're absent. In the morning, when I wake up, when I'm the first one to go on the begging round, I prepare a clean space. And then we go on the begging round and prepare water for washing the hands and the feet, and the begging bowl afterwards. And if I'm the last, and if I come back early and I finish my food and I did not eat all of my food, I make it prepared in a nice way so that the monks when my brothers come back after me and they don't have enough food, they can share with that what I didn't need. And if I'm the last one, then when the other ones are gone, I clean up the place. And so he gives a beautiful description of three people that actually live in silence, that do one thing, that they all only care for the other two. That's what he describes. Once a week, they talk about the Dharma. And the rest of the week, they live silently caring for each other. And in doing so, they all three achieved the final goal. It's a beautiful way to think about it. That is, for me, what a community means. And they are truly the Sangha. These were three people with true paths and true cessations. These were free people. And their care was non-conditional. So three people without any condition caring for each other, an utterly safe community. And that is what the Buddha wanted to show to the monks of Kosambi. Like, please get that. That is beautiful. And so when we recite these prayers, first of all, that is what we recite to remind us what that is. Who are these people? Who is the Buddha? Who are these disciples? And not as a personal story, but their content, their mind, and their actions. A big part then after that is to remind that how the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is not something that is dead, it is still here. And then to appreciate how it got here. Those 2,500 years of women and men giving their lives to bring it to us today. Somewhere in between, one generation would have thought like, yeah, whatever, I will just enjoy my bagged food and hang around in Tuptenoboding, such a nice place, good internet connection. Let's check the coffee bill. Yeah. And so if somewhere in the generation had forfeited the practice, as it were, it would have ended. But we're sitting here on the shoulders of, as they say, on the shoulders of giants. And that's why I read you these verses from these Chinese nuns yesterday, and maybe today some Angulimala, if we get around to it. That is so important to know that we are not here because of on our own accord. We're not here because we paid for it. You could not pay for them. That would be unaffordable. Elon Musk could not pay for this because he would have to pay 2,500 years of men and women that brought the Dharma to our feet. That's unrepayable. And we just pay here a little bit to keep the center open. That's it. But the true effort that was made to get us to where we are today is something really to keep rejoicing in. And so they don't need our prayers, but we do. Because only then we understand how wealthy we are. This will leave us one day. As I said yesterday, the Buddha states that the Dharma will be in the world as long as there's our hearts meditating in the forest. If we continue like this, very soon there will be no forest left. And the last arhats and bodhisattvas will disappear with it. And then we are on our own. And for the moment, we are not. So we better practice now that we can, rather than being lost later. And then we generate great motivation. And that is one of the aspects that we will meditate on today as well. Now, on the one hand, we are here together because of all these enlightened men and women. But we are also here because of everyone else. And this coffee was made by a farmer in Colombia, then brought by a trader to Santa Fe, and I was bought by some of the volunteer, or no, actually I know, Venrodundru. Whatever. That was about the kindness of someone here, and that was made by, when you think of it, the amount of effort that it takes to get me a cup of coffee is awesome. And then when you tell the story of this whole building, you end up telling the story of every other living being around us. And so these are the two conditions that bring that together. We will become enlightened due to the kindness of Buddhas, but also due to the kindness of all living beings. And so to have the appreciation of where we are today, what else then could we do to see, well, you are equally important to me. Today you might show some bad behavior or some nice behavior, but ultimately, no, we've all done silly things and impressive things. And so to equalize them, to say, like, all of you are equally important to me in this moment. You all contributed to this moment in one way or another, and how am I going to distinguish between any of you? And all of you want to be happy. And then to think deeply, like and our mistakes are, as I said yesterday, I joked yesterday, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I always say, like, I have one great sadness, that such a minor mistake in our cognition produces such misery. And that it is, that despite the fact that it is such a minor mistake, that it is so profoundly difficult to overcome. It's such a small thing. And yet the consequences are so immense. But it shows us two things. On the one hand, the problem is, well, I don't need to tell you that the problem is vast. At the same time, that the fact that the cause is so superficial also shows you that everyone could be free of it. It would, in final analysis, is surprisingly simple. And the Buddha at the beginning somewhere says, when this is, that is, when this is not, that is not. And if we would understand that, everything else would follow. And yet we have no idea what that sentence means. And the moment we will know, then they will make a statue of you and put it on the Antutanova thing. So it's something to aspire to if you want to. Yeah, Jeff. I would joke, if they ever make a statue of me, it will be with an iPad. And so to deeply know they are by nature free. As the Buddha beautifully says, monks, the mind is luminous and free from adventitious stains. The problems that we experience are not of our nature. They are just caused by a cognitive error. That's it. From the worst, what we would call the worst person in the world, to the best one, we all suffer from that same superficial problem. And we take it away, that problem would end. Now, if you could take Adolf Hitler out of his grave and show him insight, his unfortunate behavior would end. And so we have to have that view that we are surrounded by Buddhas to be is exquisite. It is hopeful. We will get there. And that is, again, why I told these stories about these Chinese nuns, because that is exactly what they did. They were caretakers. They're like mums. Like, I know you will get there, but you need time. Yeah. When you cross the road, please look left first. Second day, when you cross the road, look 3 countless eons later, when you look left. And because from their perspective, we are exactly as our little Superman back there. He doesn't know yet. He doesn't see that yet. And so you need to tell him, and that's okay. That's nice to do as well. But you know, one day he will know. One day you can stop telling him, look left first, because he knows cars drive on the right side. So you need to look left first. And from a Buddha's perspective, with regard to us, that is exactly the same thing. We exist dependently. And the Buddhas need to keep, Tara need to keep us telling that. But one day we will know for ourselves. And then we can not cross the road, we can cross the river of samsara to our safe place. And then on that basis, with that deep trust in all living beings, they can. And to think, may you be happy. May you have all the worldly needs, because people need resources. Living beings need resources. We need to eat. We need a house. We need protection. We need friends. Without these necessities, practice is not possible. When you are living at the moment in Sudan, where your village is being bombed and your neighbors are being killed, and practice makes no sense. There's no leisure. So the first thing that all living beings need is that leisure. And then you would wish that they would find happiness inside, that they would find that the source of their happiness was always inside. Yesterday I was looking, or this morning, to a little clip of a Dutch guy, that little young punk guy, and it's okay to be there. I was there as well. I tried the same thing. And we don't have an alternative to the capitalist system, but we do need to find something else. Well, the answer to the capitalist system is happiness is inside. Buy yourself a bed, a chair, a desk, and a few books. But please meditate. And then out of meditation, just be kind to your neighbors. Our happiness comes from having enough to subsist. But more than that, it comes from our social environment. The more friends we have, the happier we are. And that's the beauty, again, of being part of a monastic community. You have friends everywhere. Now I can go across the world. I can walk into Burma in a monastery, and they give me a begging bowl, and I'm welcome. To be part of a community of friends is great happiness. And we need purpose. And our real purpose is to care for others. So may they find freedom. Then to be realistic, and that is what compassion or karuna, care, is all about. That we know from our own personal experience is that it is not as easy as it sounds. Yeah. And you listen the whole day, and then you go back to your hotel and you run into the first wall, as a reminder. Yeah, that it sounds easy, but yeah, we will be struggling for a while, and that is okay. That's where we are. And to take that realism of ourselves, because true care is also very acknowledging to ourselves. When I say I care, I know of your struggles. I say, yeah, I know them, of course, because I have them. That's where we are. And to say I would wish that you are free of them also means simultaneously that I would wish that same thing for me. May we all be free. May we all be free. And then refuge makes sense. Then to say, that is what I take refuge in. That is my practice. That is the only gateway to freedom. And that freedom is happiness, is the ultimate release of the burden that we should have never carried in the first place. Yeah? Okay. Then let's do some prayers. If someone can conjure them up magically, I would now like to do all of them. Guru, teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arahat, perfectly complete Buddha, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sugata, know of the world, supreme guide of beings to be subdued, teacher of gods and humans. To you, Buddha Bhagavan, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Guru, teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arahat, perfectly complete Buddha, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sugata, know of the world, supreme guide of beings to be subdued, teacher of gods and humans. To you, Buddha Bhagavan, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Guru, teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arahat, perfectly complete Buddha, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sugata, know of the world, supreme guide of beings to be subdued, teacher of gods and humans. To you, Buddha Bhagavan, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who was then we prostrate. We have pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Savior, to you we prostrate. With the supreme science face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you we prostrate. Thus 3 like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you we prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Teacher having all understanding, a field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to dustness, we prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, we prostrate. Those who are liberated and also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, we prostrate. Do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect wholesome actions. Subdue one's own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a defective view, a bottle and flame, an illusion, a dewdrop, a water bubble, a dream, lightning, a cloud. See all causative phenomena like this. By these merits may transmigratory beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the enemy of faults, and be freed from the ocean of samsara, disturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Independent origination, there is no ceasing, no arising, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no separateness, and no sameness. We prostrate to the consummate Buddha, the supreme among all teachers, the one who taught this speech, which is freed of elaborations. Magnificent and precious Guru, please abide on the lotus and moon on our crowns. Guide us with your great kindness, and grant us the realizations of your holy body, speech, and mind. Holy body created by 10 million excellent virtues. Holy speech fulfilling the hopes of infinite transmigratory beings. Holy beam in seeing all objects of knowledge as they are. To the principle of the Shakyas we make request. Supreme heirs of the unequal teacher, having assumed the burden of all the conqueror's deeds, emanating in innumerable Buddha lands. Antreya and Manjughosha we make request. You who have control over Hero Manjushri's speech, with a fine mind and transcendental wisdom, upholding the victorious one's teachings, deep as the ocean, Savior, conquering the 3 levels of existence, to you, incomparable one, Jampanga one, Losang Yeshe Tenzin Gyatso, we make request. With your strong shoulders of learning and practice, you patiently establish in all directions the stainless banner of the Muni's teachings, and especially the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa. To the extremely steadfast Thupten Zopa we make request. I assume all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateway for the fortunate traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means moved by love. To the illuminating spiritual friends we make request. We prostrate reverently with our body, speech, and mind. We present clouds of every type of offering, both actually arranged and mentally emanated. We confess all our negative actions and downfalls collected from beginning this time. We rejoice in the virtues of ordinary beings and Aryas. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for transmigratory beings. We dedicate our own and others' virtues to the great enlightenment. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mameru, the four continents, the sun and the moon, we imagine as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Perfect, pure, holy gurus from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dharmakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dharma upon the earth of those to be subdued, exactly as they need. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnayatayami. How wonderful will be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free from the closeness of attachment and the distance of hatred. May they abide in equanimity. We ourselves will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. How wonderful will be if all sentient beings were to achieve Buddhahood. May they achieve Buddhahood. We ourselves will cause them to achieve Buddhahood. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. How wonderful will be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. We ourselves will cause them to be free from suffering and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. How wonderful will be if all sentient beings were never separated from the happiness of high rebirth and liberation. May they never be separated from these. We ourselves will cause them never to be separated from these. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. May we be the medicine and the physician for the sick. May we be that nurse until their illness never recurs. With showers of food and drink, may we overcome the afflictions of hunger and thirst. May we become food and drink during times of famine. May we be an inexhaustible treasury for the destitute. With various forms of assistance, may we remain in their presence. May we be a protector for those who are without protectors, a guide for travelers and a boat, a bridge and a ship for those who wish to cross over. May we be a lamp for those who seek light, a bed for those who seek rest, and may we be a servant for all beings who desire a servant. To all sentient beings, may we be a wish-fulfilling gem, a vase of good fortune, an efficacious mantra, a great medication, a wish-fulfilling tree, and a wish-granting cow. Just as this earth and other elements are useful in various ways to innumerable sentient beings dwelling throughout infinite space, so may we be in various ways a source of life for the sentient beings present throughout space until they're all liberated. Just as Sugatas of old adopted the spirit of awakening, and just as they properly conformed to the practice of the bodhisattvas, so we ourselves shall generate the spirit of awakening for the sake of the world, and so we ourselves shall properly engage in those practices. Upon gladly adopting the spirit of awakening in this way, intelligent people should thus nurture the spirit in order to fulfill their wish. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. Now our lives are fruitful, human existence is well obtained. Today we have been born into the family of the Buddhas. Now we are children of the Buddhas. And so I would like to invite you to sit as children of the Buddha. And to reflect for a moment that, like these Chinese nuns that we met yesterday, we are here sitting together as a community of caretakers of this world. Not as users, holding some close and others distant, depending on what we want from them. But to set free of that wanting. To sit with that equanimity between them. Joyous, spontaneous, and natural. Seeing in them and in ourselves what they have not seen yet. With hearts full of kindness and care. Generating that wish to be with them for as long as they need, in any way that they need. But to do so, to be able to do so, we need very deep pockets of good qualities. Qualities that each in and of themselves are wondrous and fulfilling. Which is exactly why cherishing others works. For to have generosity and patience, wholesome conduct, inner calm, and deep insight is what it means to be happy. It's what it means to be fulfilled, to be truly a person. Let's take a moment to take in how that feels to sit like this. To sit together as a community of aspiring bodhisattvas. Sitting here, the shoulders of giants, so that we may become giant shoulders for the next generation. And to know for sure that when we sit like this, the Buddha, the great practitioners of old, all the lineage lamas are sitting here with us. For our separateness is merely an illusion. How does that make you feel as a human being? How does that transform the way you relate to your world around you? And then to invite the breath, not as just another thing, but the breath as that which we share with all living beings. To breathe together. To hold it carefully with your mindfulness, so that your mind is open and bright. To explore that present moment of observing the breath with curiosity and wonder. so that you are empowered by having seen for yourself what brings well-being and what hampers it. To allow this empowerment to energize you. An energy that is enthusiastic about freedom. Freedom from desire, aversion, excitement, dullness, spiritual doubt. A freedom that produces an increasing sense of joy. But this is not a temporary bandage or a running away. This is sustainable freedom that you cannot grow. A joy that is so satisfactory that it makes the mind tranquil, pliant. A deep stillness starts to pervade you. And more you can rely on the mind itself to find its way. Which in turn brings, one could say, a sort of harmony. And all aspects of the mind start to move in unison. bringing us full circle to the equanimity where we can rest for a while, one breath at a time. Distraction or dullness still appears, just will for a while. Observe it as a gate to freedom. For it is only through directly seeing the disadvantages of the one of forgetfulness and the advantages of mindfulness. It will truly describe for you the road to nirvana. Okay, thank you. One interesting thing to keep in mind. Yeah. We, I see it all of the time. We have this idea when we're not seen, then what we do doesn't matter. Yeah. It's always funny with basic program exams. I sit in front of a screen with people on Zoom, all looking at their keyboards, believing that when they're not looking at me, they don't see, I'm not seeing them either, and I will not ask them questions, which is an interesting illusion. Yeah. In a similar way, when we meditate, we have the sense like when we stay upright, no one will notice that we're happily drifting off. And I need to puncture that illusion. Yeah. In fact, everyone can hear from your breath that you're happily sleeping. So someone in this room had a good nap during the last session, and we heard you. Yeah. There's two terms, and I highlighted it because dullness is one of the most difficult things to overcome. So Kappa says for good reason, it's better to do slightly too much in meditation at the beginning than too little. And because the too much is easy to overcome, but the too little becomes a bad habit. And to give you one example of this, at one point I had a guy coming to one of the Vipassana retreats that I led in Alanda. And for him was truly had become Pavlov. The moment he closed his eyes, he was gone. He in the end left the retreat because there was no way for him to do that. Yeah. And well, that's quite an achievement in its own, one could say, to get there. But it shows you something about that power. Yeah. It's also completely illusory. Dullness is not refreshing to the mind at all. When you come out of it, check the quality of your mind. It does not do what it seems to be doing. It's like all unwholesome activities of the mind. It doesn't deliver. It makes, the moment you drift away, it seems to make sense, but the opposite is quite the case. Yeah. So I played off something funny, or in a funny way. The Buddha highlights two aspects of mind that are, again, marketing problems, all about, often called shame and embarrassment, and it doesn't mean what we think it means. The first one is self-respect. And so to have a sense of what Charles Taylor, this Canadian philosopher or theologian, calls an ethical identity. So you not to say like, look, I am Gendun, I am on YouTube, I'm an influencer. Not that story, because that's an ego story. That is of no purpose to us. An ethical story is I am someone on the path to Buddhahood. It's function. I try to become a caretaker of others. That is I want to become full purpose. That's not an I am story. That's an agency story. And so to meditate with a sense like I am a bodhisattva, how does the behavior of my mind compare to that ethical ideal? How is it as a bodhisattva to sit here snoring away? And I mean, this really is effective. We need it. That is what we really need. In the meanwhile, and the other one that is often translated as embarrassment is thinking more about the social consequences that our actions have. How would others perceive if they would know what is going on within us? And again, not from a normative perspective, but we aspire to become their caretakers. So if I tell you I'm your future caretaker, and then you open your eyes and see Ken sitting here, you think, well, that's not too inspiring. I mean, I might want to hire someone else. I prefer to have a caretaker that is awake rather than one that is snoring away at the side of my bed. Yeah. And so these are helpful reflections. And so they follow from this ethical identity. And again, the bodhisattvahood is a description of oneself between others. So rather than an isolated I am story, is telling the story of how I exist. I exist interdependently with you. Within that interdependence, who am I? And we can answer it in a broad way, like if we are practicing Buddhist, then the answer is we are bodhisattvas to be. That is what we aspire to. Buddhahood is the perfection of personality, of personhood. But in the meantime, we are also specific bodhisattvas to be. We bring our own characteristics with us. That's also an interesting question. Right? Maybe we are nurses, maybe we are artists, maybe we are managers, maybe we are whatever we are. That's an interesting question. So with the gifts that I have, with the characteristics and capacities I have, how does bodhisattvahood express itself through me? And that is a good way to sit. So not in a normative way, to accept that the mind does all kinds of activities quite on its own, and not all of it is as rewarding, one could say, or as beautiful. But because of our ignorance, very quickly, especially when we're sitting on our cushion or when it is only happening inside, our mind comes easily to the conclusion it doesn't matter because no one else has seen it. Yeah. And that is really something that is worth your while to overcome. Yeah. And to see your actions always as they truly are. They're always, in a way, public. They're always in the world. There's no inside and outside. The outside permeates me and I permeate the outside. There is, as we saw yesterday, that boundary between in and out is vague, if not entirely non-existent. Yeah. Yeah, so it is worth our while to consider who we are inside as part of the world in our meditation. And that perspective helps that sense of an ethical identity to grow, to become something really alive and a view that guides your intent. And that brings me back to your question yesterday. So, like cars can drive. Obviously, that is the function of a car, but the car can't do that without the engine. And the engine is not the car. In fact, the engine is not an engine without a car either. And so the car can drive, but for its driving, it is dependent on the engine. And the engine, but for the engine to work well, it needs good surrounding circumstances. When it doesn't, it functions badly. When the admixture of fuel and oxygen is not okay, or air, it burns badly. And if it's the other way around, it also burns badly, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And so this is very good to think about in the same way about our intent. So can we act as persons? Yes, of course we can. But for that, we rely on the mental factor of intention. And so when it has the wrong conditions around it, it misfires, it burns badly, one could say. And so for me, for my intent to work in a good manner, I needed to have the right circumstances. So to sit on your cushion and just to wish yourself into nirvana is not working. It's the wrong admixture. And so that is what we will come back to after our little break. What we need is a narrative, because our perception is already a narrative, it's a story. I look at you, but I don't see you as you are. I see the story that I tell about you. That's what I see. Yeah. And so for my intent, I need a story about me that is helpful, that guides my intent, that is powerful, that holds the whole thing together. Like I have a sense, and again, that is what I mentioned yesterday. And when we talk about motivation, that's really what it is. I'm a bodhisattva practitioner. That is what this moment of my experience is. So is it in accordance with that or not? And increasingly, intent and that narrative will fall. They're not separated from each other. They will mold into each other. Yeah. There's many things to say about that, but not before our break. Yeah. Here we are again. Now we define something. '68. So we were talking about an ethical identity, and of course, one of the struggles that we tend to have, the consequences of self-story is getting stuck in I am, where what follows is not very pleasant. Where we get stuck in something that happened in the past, where our mind doesn't recognize that these things arose due to causes and conditions. And we start to struggle with guilt and worry. And the Buddha lists that this problem is, of all meditative obstacles, the greatest, by far. Yeah. And we will work with that today. But on the one hand, it should become obvious that the Buddha denies that an I am story ever works. It's untrue by its very nature. And so later today, we will look at ourselves as flowing beings rather than, that's for this afternoon. And so when the Buddha is not compassionate because he should be. And again, it's not a religious command in that sense. The Buddha is caring because he sees how we exist. And one of the still very poignant stories in our canon, very contemporary, is a story of, I promised the man here that I would also tell some manly stories. So this is the manly story for today. So if you felt left out, here we are. To be honest, I do this because I think that maybe is a little intermezzo, but we are mutually interdependent. And now to talk about men without talking about women and vice versa doesn't make any sense. If I would be on a planet with only men, then the word man is superfluous. It would not indicate anything anymore. And as I said yesterday, the Buddha is, as far as I know, the first person that ever created a community for women to be safe. And we should honor that. And it is one of my great pains that our monastic community does not always live up to that ideal. Increasingly, luckily, yes, but there's still lots of work to be done. So on the one hand, I truly hold, and I mean that, not out of normativity or some misguided idealism, but the perfection of my community is in us having both fully ordained men and women. That is the community that was created. In fact, the definition of a Buddhist country or a Buddhist place is where the fourfold community is present. Lay men, lay women, fully ordained men, fully ordained women. Don't tell a Tibetan that. I tried a few times with the abbot of the monastery, but he did not appreciate my debate argument. But that's a historical consequence of Tibet being on the top of the Himalayas. Moreover, I have had the pleasure of training with many very accomplished women as well. So for me, also in that sense, it's important to honor my own lineage. One of my greatest meditation teacher that I ever worked with, that I told you a little bit about yesterday, Salaya Dalbarmanika, is a woman and magnificent. I would not have been able to do what I did without her. So in that sense, that is why that aspect for me is important. But to come back to our story, so the Buddha sees others as they are, and his care follows from what he sees. It's not, again, it's not a command, it's not a religious necessity. It simply flows out of seeing what someone is. And to keep Angulimala's story short and describe his biography in a way that resonates quite well in the present, is that Angulimala was a very vulnerable man. Who knows what had been done to him, but he was looking for a father figure. And then found a religious teacher with very bad opinions that impelled him to kill out of religious purposes. and he was good at it. He killed many. One day the Buddha passes by in the region and gets up early in the morning, and he knows where he is going. He walks through a village, or he's living in a village. He goes into a forested valley, and the villagers warn him not to go there. They say Angulimala. Angulimala, by the way, means necklace of fingers. He had by that time killed about 99 people, and as keeping rotting corpses around was pretty disgusting even for him, he cut off their fingers, dried them, and hung them around his neck as a necklace. Here you are. Yeah. And that is not uncommon even today, let's be honest. And so it's a man lost, but a man seen by others as someone in and of himself as being bad. In fact, so bad that the villagers had contacted the king, King Bimbasara, and while the Buddha was heading into the village, despite their advice, also the king was on his way with an army to kill him. Because that is what you do to bad people. Because if someone is bad in and of himself or herself, then there's only one thing you can do about it: imprison him or kill him. And that's what we tend to do. But we also do that to ourselves. And what we do to others, we do in minor ways, often to ourselves. I am bad as well. I deserve to live in my own prison of judgment. And then something interestingly happens. So the Buddha walks in, and it's a mythical story, but I mean, the story in a beautiful way mixes what happens on the outside with what happens on the inside. You know, that's the problem with stories. If you just tell what happened, it's not very interesting. The story tells you what Angulimala experienced when that happened. And that is more interesting. As sometimes historical facts are superfluous. And the story mixes history with someone's personal experience with the Buddha. And so the Buddha, wearing robes similar to mine, walks into that forested area. And Angulimala, according to the story, was looking ahead with one last finger to catch. And here was the ideal victim. As Angulimala comes storming down the hill and tries to catch up with the Buddha. And despite the fact that he is running and the Buddha is calmly walking or trying to open bags, which is very hard. All the things that happen in this valley is overwhelming. I shall not tell all of them. But and so Angulimala is trying to catch up with the Buddha, and he can't. So despite the fact that the Buddha is walking very calmly and mindfully, no matter how much he runs, he can't catch up, to his surprise, running there with his sword. And at one point, he becomes so frustrated that he screams out, "Monk or bhikshu, stop." And the Buddha stops, slowly turns around and says to him, "I stopped a long time ago. When will you stop?" According to the story, and I will read in a moment the verses of Angulimala. But what you see is that what Angulimala says is that he realizes that this person is here for him, not to judge him, but to end suffering. Because suffering produces simply more suffering. It could have killed him, and it would have just created causes for more killing and more killing. You can't stop it that way. So the Buddha did not go there to pursue justice. That's an interesting aspect about the Dharma. There is no idea of justice in there. Suffering needs to end. As Shantideva says, the function of suffering is its end, is its ending. And that is what the Buddha is there to do. Not to judge Angulimala. He knows, he just doesn't know. In a very bad way. But it's so human to not feel good enough. And to want to live up to someone's expectations, even if these expectations are terrible. And so then Angulimala says the following. Let's see if I can get through it. While you are walking recluse, you tell me you have stopped. But now, when I have stopped, you say, I have not stopped. I ask you now, O recluse, about the meaning. How is it that you have stopped and I have not? Angulimala, I have stopped forever. I abstain from violence towards living beings, but you have not restrained towards things that live. That is why I have stopped, and you have not. Oh, at last, this recluse, a venerated sage, has come to this great forest for my sake. Having heard your stanzas teaching me the Dhamma, I will indeed renounce evil forever. So saying, the bandit took his sword and weapons and flung them into a gaping chasm's pit. The bandit worshipped by the Sublime One's feet, and then and there asked for the going forth. The enlightened one, the sage of great compassion, the teacher of the world, with all its gods, addressed him with these words, "Come, bhikkhu." And that is how he became a bhikkhu. Yeah. To give you some more of his words, let's see. Well, maybe he finished a bit of a story which is fascinating about. No, let me just tell it. So Angulimala is profoundly, as you heard, profoundly moved. That is not what he expected. Someone was there for his sake and his sake alone. And so he becomes a bhikkhu, a bhikshu, and practices and manages, in fact, to find his final freedom. And again, you should read the sutra. There's much detail that I leave to the side, which is equally fascinating, but it would take a while. So after having found his freedom, and one morning, he walks into a village to beg, and he goes past a house where a woman is in labor. But the child is in the wrong position. It's not coming out. And she's hurting. And he's so overcome by seeing her that he hurries back to the Buddha and says, that's what I've seen. No, she is dying. What can I do? And then the Buddha says, go back to her and tell her, since I've been born, I've never harmed beings willfully. Now Angulimala says that, uh, how does that work? And the Buddha just smiles at him, indeed. Tell her, since I've been reborn in the Dharma, I have not willfully hurt a single living being. And so he goes to her and he sits next to her and he tells her, since I've been reborn in the Dharma, I have never willfully harmed a single living being. In that moment, the child comes out effortless. It's what is called the power of the truth. Angulimala, the man with 99 fingers around his neck, is still, up to this day in Thailand, the patron saint of pregnant women. People still pray to him when they are in labor. Yeah, that is the power of the Dharma. It's one of the most amazing stories in our canon. That is the alternative to justice, is to end suffering altogether. So Angulimala did not only stop his killing, but even 2,500 years later, he is the protector of women in that more difficult moment of their lives, giving birth. Yeah. And thereby, in his own way, he became a mother of all living beings. Yeah. And that is what we together pursue. So as we have only 5 minutes left, then let's Angulimala speak some more. So he talks about himself, who once did live in negligence, and then is negligent no more. He or she illuminates this world like the moon freed from a cloud, who checks the evil deeds he did by doing wholesome deeds instead. He illuminates this world like the moon freed from a cloud. The youthful bhikkhu who devotes his or her efforts to the Buddha's word teachings. He illuminates this world like the moon freed from a cloud. Let my enemies hear discourse on the Dharma. Let them be devoted to the Buddha's teaching. Let my enemies wait on those good people who lead others to accept the Dharma. Let my enemies give ear from time to time and hear the Dharma of those who preach forbearance, of those who speak as well in praise of kindness, and let them follow up with deeds, with kind deeds. For surely then they would not wish to harm me, nor would they think of harming other beings. So those who would protect all, frail or strong, let them attain the all-surpassing peace. Conduit makers guide the water, fletchers straight out the arrow shaft, carpenters straighten out the timber, but wise men seek to tame themselves. There are some that tame with beatings, some with goads and some with whips, but I was tamed by such a one who has no rod nor any weapon. Harmless is the name I bear. He changed name when he became ordained. Though I was dangerous in the past, the name I bear today is true. I hurt no living beings at all. And though I once lived as a bandit, known to all as Finger Garland, Angulimala, one whom the great flood swept along, I went for refuge to the Buddha. And though I once was bloody-handed, with the name of Finger Garland, seek the refuge I have found. The bond of being has been cut. While I did many deeds that lead to rebirth in the evil realms, yet the results have reached me now. And so I eat free from the debt. That talks about a moment where he actually goes into a village where they know him and they beat him to a pulp. But as he is an arahat, he walks away free of mind. And so he rejoices that the debt has been paid. There are fools have no sense, who give themselves to negligence. But those of wisdom guard diligence and treat it as their greatest good. Do not give way to negligence, nor seek delight in sensual pleasures, but meditate with diligence so as to reach the perfect bliss. So welcome to that choice of mine, and let it stand. It was not ill-made. Of all the teaching resorted to, I have come to the very best. So welcome to that choice of mine, and let it stand. It was not ill-made. I have attained the triple knowledge and done all that the Buddha teaches. So let's maybe just sit in silence for a moment with those words. So allow yourself to let go of all guilt and remorse. For it is truly sufficient to seek freedom and thereby end the suffering of all. So thank you, and maybe now alleviate the suffering of hunger. Although my mother always said, typically for the 1970s, only children in Africa have hunger, you have appetite.